You know by instinct that it is impossible to teach democracy, or citizenship, or a happy married life. They come, not from a course, but from a teacher, not from a curriculum, but from a human soul. Jacques Barzun Walker, my boxing trainer, was a guy named Ariel Blair. His mother named him Ariel, which, he often told us with a smile, meant the Lion of God. When he was growing up in Washington, D.C., during the Depression, most of the kids he played with couldn't pronounce his name, so Ariel became Earl. In his teens he worked odd jobs, cleaning an excursion boat, shining shoes, washing dishes, bussing tables. He joined the segregated military at the end of World War II, and when he came home from the war he had several careers, in construction, cleaning and testing air cylinders, as a mobile messenger delivering telegrams. When I met Earl he was working in a warehouse during the day and teaching boxing at night. You and Earl look pretty different. He's a half-century older than you. He's black. You're white. He's urban, you're rural. But you and Earl have more in common than a lot of people I know. You've both had calluses on your hands since you were 14 years old, and you both instinctively distrust people who haven't had to work as hard as you. You've both lived hard lives, punctuated by tragedy. And you are both very aware that your time on earth is limited. You both joke a lot and laugh hard, but I don't know many people who think as seriously about what it means to live well. You both wake up in the middle of the night wondering if you're doing it right. You both grew up in schools that didn't know what to do with boys who had more energy than patience. You managed to graduate from high school, which Earl never did, yet both of you feel that you're missing something. Sometimes you think of yourselves as uneducated. You've both been unfairly judged for it, and you've felt that prejudice rub against you for a long time. You share some fears. You're both gifted with words, but afraid to write. You've both built up stores of wisdom, but too often you're afraid to share what you've learned. Earl has to be coaxed to walk into a school and speak to young people. You, a man who patrolled the streets of Afghanistan, are afraid to travel to a city in the United States and talk with veterans who want to hear your story. And in this way, both of you, tremendously courageous men most of the time, sometimes act out of fear when everyone needs you to stand with strength. There are elementary school children in Earl's neighborhood who need to hear some of his stories. They should hear about the time when Earl was on Okinawa, the Rock. He complained about segregation in the army and was thrown in the stockade for insubordination. One of his friends slipped out of the barracks at night and crawled to the fence line outside Earl's cell. Earl crawled out and they whispered through the wire. His friend told Earl that he'd overheard the commanding officer say they were going to find a way to provoke Earl when he was on a work detail, make Earl attack one of the guards, and then they'd shoot him. They said, "That man will not leave the Rock alive." They also need to hear Earl tell his story about the Jewish doctor on the base who didn't want to see anyone punished on account of prejudice. The doctor risked his own career, got Earl off the Rock, and saved Earl's life. He also, to hear Earl tell it, changed Earl's own prejudiced view of people who were Jewish. A lot of men who live hard lives withdraw into themselves. For them, a nod can constitute conversation. You and Earl both admire and appreciate such men because you've spent a lot of time around them. But you also recognize that these men, while they can set a great example, too often die without sharing what they've learned. You and Earl both became trainers. As soon as you made it back from Afghanistan, you signed up to be a SEAL trainer. There are still many frogmen who know how to think under fire and how to fight as a team because of what you taught them. Earl trained men to box, and perhaps more important, he trained them in how to live well. Earl said he wasn't a coach makes you more skilled, shows you how to be better at a certain activity, maybe it's running, maybe it's throwing, maybe it's boxing. But what's the point? The point is, after a coach coaches you, you can go and do whatever you want with your new skill. You learn to run, you can go rob a store. You learn to fight, you can go fight in the street. But that's not what I'm about. I am not a coach with players, but a teacher with students. I teach my boxers not just a set of skills, but a way of living. So I want to write about one of the first lessons about living I picked up from Earl. It's pretty simple. But if it were obvious, I wouldn't have needed Earl to teach me. I started boxing with Earl when I was 19. I was a sophomore in college. During the day, on campus, I studied Aristotle. Aristotle told his students that what is valuable and pleasant to a morally good man actually is valuable and pleasant. In other words, you know what the good thing is, by seeing what the good person does. If you want to know how to live well, don't make things more complicated than they need to be. Just look at a model of someone who's already living well. Start there. After reading Aristotle in class, I drive into Durham and make my way to a small boxing gym tucked in a corner of a rough neighborhood. There Earl and I would train with Derek. Derek, my training partner, worked in construction. He was 6'2" and had the powerful build of a tall, fast fighter. He fought professionally. He was a young guy at the time, 26, but since I was 7 years younger, it seemed to me that Derek had a whole planet of experience underneath him. When I asked Earl, "How do I throw a jab?" he said, "Watch Derek. Do as he does." When Earl let me start training on the heavy bag, he'd have me watch Derek. He'd say, "There's your picture, Eric. Watch how Derek works the bag." Derek was my model, and I learned faster by watching and imitating him than I ever could have done by reading a book or listening to a coach alone. Earl and Aristotle. They both said the same thing: find a model. Do as they do. Walker, let's remember that stupid hurts. Human beings learn by imitating other human beings. Probably the most complex intellectual feat any of us will ever achieve is learning to talk. And we do it simply by listening to others, trying to do what they do. We survive because we imitate. We pass on cultures and languages and common sense because we imitate. And what we imitate are not only skills, how you ride a bike or climb a rope, but ways of being. How do you talk to your neighbor? How do you carry yourself on patrol? How do you press on when your body is begging you to quit? You watch someone else do it, and you imitate. What's strange about the way most of us live is that we know how important it is to have models. Everyone wants their children to look for good role models. Yet once we become adults, we stop looking. That's just stupid. And it leads to a lot of unnecessary pain. Karl Marlantes, a Vietnam veteran, wrote an excellent book called What It Is Like to Go to War. It starts with this: any fool can learn from his mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others. Otto von Bismarck. When we did something dumb in Buds, remember how the instructors would say, "Well, if you don't want to be smart, then you better be hard." Then they'd make us do 237 burpees in the sand, or run in and out of the ocean a dozen times. The lesson was, stupid hurts. Be smart. That's still true today, Walker. You've written to me a lot about your brother Ed. You told me that after he died,
my world turned upside down. I didn't know what else to do when I fell on hard times, but drink. So drink I did, and did it often, and to extremes. I drank like a whale, not a fish. I denied myself the ability to feel, and when drinking stopped working, I drank some more. When drinking more stopped working, I tried drinking even more. I would black out in my backyard and wake up face down next to my barbecue pit, then walk to the store to buy more beer.
Now, Walker, what is that? Read your own writing above. How would you describe it? I write this loving you, but this above is only one thing and you know it. It's stupid. I have 2 brothers. Both of them, thank God, are alive and healthy. I don't know what it's like to lose a brother. But I do know this: you are not the first person to lose someone you love. You are not the first person to lose a brother. In all the times that you've written to me about Ed, you've told me about what happened to you, what you did, what you felt, what you wished you had done, what you failed to do. Never once have you told me about someone you admire who learned how to endure a brother's death. In all this time, I've never heard you refer to someone else's story or struggle. You've been trapped in your own mind and your own life and your own story. Of course, you didn't know what to do. You've never had to do this before. But other people have had to deal with this. So learn from them. You've already done the hardest thing, Walker. You've started. You wrote.
I didn't know that I was reaching out for your guidance and wisdom when I asked you for that letter of reference, but I was. I now have the strength to act on the wisdom you know I have. I will achieve resilience through my hardship. I will persevere. The time for Zach Walker to be the resilient man I know I can be and am is right now. Not tomorrow, not in 10 minutes, right this second.
So what's next? What do we do first? Let's find a model. Now, how do we do that well? If I sat down in your living room and placed a giant bag of jigsaw puzzle pieces on a table in front of you and asked you to put all of the pieces together, what's the first thing you'd ask for? First, you'd probably ask for a reason. Why are you asking me to do a puzzle, G? But if for the moment you accept that you're going to sew the puzzle, what would you ask for? I'm guessing you'd ask for a picture. You'd want to know how all of the pieces come together. You'd want to know what you're trying to make. Here's the thing, life only hands you pieces. You have to figure out how to put them together. Your life doesn't come with a picture of what it's supposed to look like on the box. You get to, choose that picture for yourself. And you choose it by looking for a model of a life well lived. There's your picture, Eric. Watch how Derek works the bag. What's powerful about this simple idea is that, over time, you'll begin to find models for almost any part of your life that you want to make excellent. And because of this, in any well-lived life, you'll likely not have one model, but many. Let me tell you a bit about how I've used models in my life. In the summer of 1994, I went overseas to work with Bosnian refugees. Bosnia had been racked by vicious campaigns of ethnic cleansing. I lived and worked in refugee camps, and it was in those camps that I tried to do my first documentary photography work. I wasn't a great photographer. I certainly wasn't anything close to being professional, but after seeing how the refugees lived, I knew, in general terms, what I wanted to do. I wanted to show people that even in times of great hardship, men, women, and children can live with courage and dignity. I also knew that I wasn't the first person to try to do this. So I read Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, an unorthodox, deeply felt work of reporting and photographs that brought the lives of Depression-era tenant farmers, in all their struggle and pride, to the American public. I read James Agee's first-hand account of the farmers' lives. I studied Walker Evans's black and white photographs. I looked for other models too, Dorothea Lange's iconic images of the American Dust Bowl, Sebastião Salgado's remarkable panoramas from Brazil. I read Down and Out in Paris and London, a book George Orwell wrote about his time living among those who had been forgotten. Not everything I studied or read proved to be a good model for me. I photographed in black and white, and so I studied Ansel Adams. I looked at his work, bought his books, went to his exhibits, and nothing. His work just didn't seem to be the right model for mine. He photographed landscapes, I photographed people. He photographed from far away, I took pictures up close. It's not that I didn't recognize the genius in his work. I did. It's just that it wasn't the kind of genius that I sought to emulate. I mention it because you should keep in mind that not everyone is, can be, or should be a model for you, even if they are great. Later, when I went to Rwanda, Bolivia, Cambodia, India, Mexico, Albania, and Gaza, I tried to photograph like Salgado and Evans. I tried to capture honest personal photographs of people living noble lives through incredible trials. And I tried to do this in a way that would give others some insight into, connection with, and respect for the lives of others. What I produced was uniquely my own. Evans and Salgado couldn't take the photographs for me. And, over time, I developed my own style. I look at Salgado's work in Terra and it's obvious how far away I am from his excellence, but my own work was better because I had his model to aim at. There's no excellence in a vacuum. Look at the most original people you can think of, the path-breaking scientist, the profound artist, the record-setting athlete, and you'll find people who started by copying. Start copying what you love. Copy, 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 copy. At the end of the copy you will find yourself. That's from Yohji Yamamoto, an influential fashion designer. I'm guessing that this is the first time in recorded history that one seal has given guidance to another by quoting a fashion designer, but hey man, what's true is true. What's true is that the way to excellence starts by copying the excellence around you. Those who do not want to imitate anything, produce nothing. Salvador Dali said that, and if anyone should know about originality, he should. Before he wrote the symphonies that would revolutionize music, Beethoven copied Mozart's style. Before he pioneered Cubism, Pablo Picasso mastered the realistic style of the painters who came before him. Before he wrote the dialogues that made Socrates immortal, Plato spent nearly every day just listening to Socrates talk. So copy, day after day. And one day you'll take stock and find that what started out as copying, whether it's your writing, or your way of being a dad, or your way of facing up to loss, has become something uniquely your own. Now, let's say that you look around for a while. You read, you talk with friends and family. You search. How do you know if you found a model? It's pretty straightforward. When you find yourself reflecting on someone's positive example to guide your thinking and your actions and you begin to imitate him, then you have a model. When you ask most adults who are your role models, they hem and haw and then, after a few moments pause, say, my parents. If you push them on this, they will, revealingly, start to talk about someone who was a role model for them when they were a child or a young adult. They'll tell you about how the person influenced their life many years ago. But they rarely tell you about how they are modeling themselves after someone today. We don't grow in courage or wisdom or resilience by thinking alone. We grow in these virtues by observing how they are embodied in courageous, wise, resilient people of flesh and blood, and by emulating them. A model can be living or dead. A model can be someone you have never met, or a person you live with. A model can be an age, any race, any gender, someone who has achieved monumental greatness, or someone who has lived a quietly honorable life. What all good models share is an excellence that draws us to emulate them. The writer Hunter S. Thompson once set out to learn the secrets of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, the book he admired more than any other. So he typed out the entire book for himself, because, he said, he wanted to understand what it felt like to write a masterpiece, word by word. That might strike us as more than a little crazy. The goal is to learn from our models, not to make ourselves unto identical copies of them. Yet I think there's some wisdom in Thompson's practice. He was trying to get into the mind of his model, to know how it felt to type a perfect sentence. Over the past few weeks, Walker, you've been asking me to give you some guidance about how you can become a leader in your town, how you can organize people to clean up parks, to build monuments, to raise money for good causes. You want to know what to do first, second, and then third. And I haven't really answered you. Here's why. It's not because I don't want you to become a leader in your town, or because I think you can't do it. It's because you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't, what do I do? The question is, who do I learn from, and how do I learn from them? Form a model, and you'll know what to do. Remember the jigsaw puzzle? Who's your picture? Who leads in your community in a way that you admire? How are you going to learn from them? Thompson wasn't trying to write The Great Gatsby. That book had already been written. But he was trying, in a devoted way, to imitate his model's process. You won't achieve exactly what your model has achieved. But by learning the habits, disciplines, and practices that made their accomplishments possible, you'll find your way to accomplishments of your own. Rather than ask, how can I achieve what they achieved? By asking, how can I create myself as they created themselves? After I was hit by the suicide truck bomb in Iraq, I felt, for a few days at least, that I'd lost part of my hearing. When I went to the VA for a hearing test, they told me I was fine. But the experience made me think about what I'd do if I went deaf. One thing I'd definitely do would be to read a biography of Beethoven. When he was 31, and it became clear that he was losing his hearing for good, he thought long and hard about killing himself. He even sat down to write a suicide note. But instead, the note became a testament to his decision to keep living. He saved it among his papers, and it was only discovered after he died of natural causes 25 years later. He wrote, "O fellow men, when at some point you read this, someone who had had misfortune may console himself to find a similar case." He's telling us, I've been there. You're not alone. Think about all the ways models help us learn resilience. Models offer hope. After an entrepreneur goes bankrupt, a soldier loses a limb, or a mother loses a child, it may feel to each of them as if joy has been permanently crushed from their life. But if they meet another business leader, another soldier, another mother who has passed through similar hardship and still built a meaningful life, they may come to see how much is still possible. When we see what others have done, we begin to ask what we might do. We begin to see a way through. Models offer practical wisdom. The closer the model's experience is to yours, the more practical advice you may find. You can benefit from the example of your model's mistakes and learn from the example of your model's strengths. No one can speak to a wounded veteran like another wounded veteran. No one can speak to a family that has cared for a desperately ill child like another family that has done the same. Even if we are unable to find someone who has struggled as we have struggled, we still have no reason to feel alone. We have no excuse for failing to learn. As long as we can read, we have access to models from all of recorded history, biographies that are reservoirs of insight, stories of human tragedy and human possibilities. Literature and history are among our greatest resources in this regard. By immersing ourselves in stories, we learn to exercise the moral imagination. By putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, by trying to see what she say and hear what she heard and feel what she might have felt, we expand our sense of what is possible in our own lives. When we learn how to enter into the stories and experiences of others, we're learning some of what they learned. It takes humility to realize that your story is not unique. It takes empathy to realize that the stories of others matter as much as your own. Reading literature and history, starting to learn the stories of others as early as we can, fosters those virtues. Let me offer another thought for you. Think about what it means to have a liberal arts education. The word liberal has, at its root, liber, the same root, of course, as the word liberty. The idea of learning literature and history is that they free you to see how you might live. They free you to live a better life, informed by all of the accumulated knowledge and wisdom available to you. They free you from living inside the narrow confines of your own story. People can have one virtue without having them all. Those who are brave might also be impatient. Those who are patient might also be unjust. And even when people exercise one virtue in one context, they often fail to exercise the same virtue in another. The disciplined athlete is the undisciplined spender. The courageous soldier becomes the frightened father. We don't choose out models in a spirit of passive, all-consuming admiration, as a child does. We must choose actively, as an adult does. We're seasoned enough to know that no one exercises a perfect and complete set of the virtues. We can select the qualities we want to emulate, leaving aside the rest without regrets. We can admire the profound wisdom of Plato without accepting or ignoring his deep elitism, which held that many of us have no hope of achieving wisdom at all. We can admire the free-thinking genius of Thomas Jefferson without accepting or ignoring his ownership of other human beings. We can admire the audacity of Richard Wagner, a nearly self-taught musician who became one of history's greatest composers, without accepting or ignoring his hatred of Jews. We can admire without ignoring, because we are adults, and that is what adults are capable of. As a kid, I loved Aquaman. I thought he was the best. I'm sure that you had your own superhero too. As children, we like to believe in the shining, flawless hero. That belief is entirely appropriate to childhood. But in time we have to put away childish things. Our lives change, and our models should change with them. I'm not still going around jumping off the couch wearing unheroes and idolizing Aquaman. Though truth be told, I'm looking forward to having kids old enough to jump off couches with me. The models you choose for your life should match the challenges you're facing. Right now, you might have a model for how to deal with your brother's death, a model for how to serve in the community, and a model for how to be a father. Over time, you'll grow. Your sense of self will change. You'll have new challenges, and you will choose new models of excellence to help you meet them. The model who was perfect at one time in our lives can turn imperfect as our lives and our needs change. The model who taught us courage may be ill-suited when the times demand patience. At each stage, we pursue different dreams, learn different ways of living a good life, and pass through different trials. So we cannot hold inflexibly to your models. We cannot make them into idols. And when times change, we have to let go of our models with gratitude. The most important thing to let go of, the things so many of us struggle to let go of, is the idea that our heroes are flawless. We have to put that idea away, if only because such a view of heroes begins to limit our view of our own lives. If we believe that our heroes are flawless, we begin to believe that we, being flawed, are incapable of heroism. In this way, a belief in the perfection of others can inhibit our own growth. Adult heroism is different. The adult knows that all heroic lives are, in a sense, a heroic struggle to overcome our own limitations. Believing in the perfection of heroes can hamper us in another way. When we finally find out that our heroes are not perfect, but human, we can be tempted to dismiss all that is heroic about them. Sometimes people do this to comfort themselves. If no one is heroic, they think, then why should I try? Flawed heroes are still heroic. Every Achilles has an Achilles heel. Your hero is flawed. So are you. Congratulations, you have that in common. Now, make yourself similar in another way, go be heroic.